Hello, my name is Kenneth Dillon. I'm an historian and scientific researcher, and today I'd like to talk with you about my theory, which is called the Martian theory of mass extinctions. Most of us are familiar with the five great mass extinctions of prehistory, and we know that there were many minor extinctions as well. The extinctions involved, among other things, volcanic eruptions, seismic events, a lot of air pollution, uh, uh, climate change, sea level rise, anoxic rising of the water column from the depths of the ocean, and other kinds of mass wasting, for example, other kinds of devastation. And so the question is, what was the cause of all of these mass extinctions? And perhaps there were several different causes. There have been many suggestions made, but scientists don't agree on any one of them. And so this is an open area of discussion. And today I'm going to explain to you this theory of the Martian approaches repeatedly that caused the mass extinctions. But before we get to that, we have to understand at least the basic outcome of another theory, and that is my theory of the outer solar system origin of the terrestrial planets, which is an argument that Mars and Earth and the other terrestrial planets were pulled by Jupiter's gravity into the inner solar system. And one consequence of that was that as they came into the inner solar system, they had very highly elliptical orbits. And that meant that they were very likely to intersect. The orbits of Earth and Mars intersected. And during 4 billion years, up till near to the present, Mars and Earth had such intersecting orbits. So it's not surprising that we have evidence going way back to 4 billion years ago, evidence that might suggest an encounter between Earth and Mars. For instance, the Tharsis region uplifted on Mars, a giant region that is uplifted, that was done, according to the theory, by Earth's gravity. And so too, the gigantic volcanoes on Mars were lifted up repeatedly over and over again until they reached the immense size and height that they have. Olympus Mons is the largest volcano in the solar system. So this was a very powerful effect. And you can find on the other side of Mars, the Hellas Basin, which is the opposite. It's being pulled in, but presumably also by the gravitational pull of Earth. So once we understand that these orbits are intersecting, then it becomes much more believable that this would happen. And we can see when they did encounter each other, Earth and Mars, two things could have happened. First is that they would be on such tracks in their orbits that they would repeatedly encounter each other. And that's one of the characteristics of the great mass extinctions, that they were not necessarily a single strike. They were continually one after another over the course of several million years, perhaps, of these great insults, so to speak. And that, of course, added to the destruction. And the other feature that this would explain is why the various mass extinctions differed in size. Some of them were completely devastating, others were devastating, but not so bad. And that would have to do presumably with how close Mars came to Earth. That the really worst ones would have been near misses. They could have had a collision that had been just a several thousand kilometers difference from the actual orbits. So the closer the encounter, the greater the extinction on Earth, and the greater the geological activity on Mars. And this, therefore, would account also for many of the minor extinctions. Earth's gravity, one could argue, as a critic, would surely have melted the surface of Mars, and so that's a real a problem. But the answer to that criticism is that the Martian surface was spared, and it was spared by the phenomenon of tidal locking, that Mars would quickly come to the place in its surface and stop its rotation at a place facing the Earth that would be pulled by the Earth. And we see that in the mountains and the volcanoes and in the Cretaceous region. Also far off to the side, if you look on a map of Mars, you'll see the Elysium Mons, and that was presumably an older case of this kind of tidal locking. And because there was tidal locking, vast areas of Mars were never even affected. Why were the great mass extinctions so amazingly devastating? And one reason, perhaps the main reason, is that in contrast to the most recent catastrophes that we're aware of, the Bronze Age catastrophes of the period of about 2525 BC to about 750, 700 BC. In contrast, there was a different kind of phenomenon going on. But let's take a look at the Bronze Age catastrophes. The famous controversy over Immanuel Velikovsky's theory that Venus exploded out of Jupiter and came repeatedly on an Earth approaching orbit into the inner solar system on one of these very elliptical orbits into the inner solar system, interacted with Earth. That was rejected by most scientists, and the reason, one of the reasons, and perhaps a very major reason, was that it seemed quite bizarre to think that Venus had actually exploded out of Jupiter, and indeed that is hard to believe. But now we have a revised Venus theory that provides a much simpler, much more believable explanation, and that is that, as with the other planets, Venus was pulled by Jupiter's gravity past Jupiter. It had tidal locking with Jupiter at the time it was passing, heated up enormously. Jupiter pulled it into an ovoid shape. And we see that in the ancient iconography around the world. And then Venus sped off into the inner solar system as a giant comet, and then interacted with Earth and with Mars, and eventually settled into a circularized orbit. Velikovsky pointed out, interpreting ancient evidence, that there were actually 4 inversions of Earth during especially close, I argue, especially close approaches of Venus. Earth there was a torque on Earth, and Earth began to turn over, and it turned over in 10 days. In the Chinese annals, these are called 10-day events. They turned over in 10 days, and as a result, you had an inversion happen 4 times. And we now have in this revised Venus theory the approximate dates for those 4 times, which are very helpful for working it into the scheme of ancient history. And as a result, there were great tsunamis and other kinds of destruction at these times, but they were not completely wiping out civilization or wiping out tremendous numbers of species. And we would have to say that on the scale of the great mass extinctions, they were a very, very minor extinction. Meanwhile, if we take this same paradigm and go back to the great mass extinctions and look at what would have happened if Mars had approached very close to Earth, Mars of course being much smaller than Venus, still it could come much closer to Earth upon occasion, and maybe these 5 occasions were the times when it got really close to Earth, almost collided with Earth, and that would then entail a rapid inversion on Earth, and the Earth would have maybe perhaps in a single day, not 10 days, but a single day, have turned over. And in that case, one can imagine Earth crossing, continent crossing tsunamis of just an enormous sort that would roll across the Earth. And we know, actually, curiously, we know that around 3.4 billion years ago, there were giant tsunamis on Mars, back at a time when Mars had more water on its surface or near its surface. And presumably those were caused by the Earth's interaction with Mars. At any rate, during these inversions, these rapid inversions, one can imagine that one would get the terrific mass wasting that seems to have characterized the 5 great mass extinctions. And that would explain why perhaps the best known aspect of the 5 mass extinctions was the last one, the Cretaceous Paleogene one of 66 million years ago, that it was caused, as has been shown by scientists, it was caused by a gigantic impact around the Gulf of Mexico, and the Chicxulub crater created all kinds of devastation. But another group of scientists say that, well, in India, the Deccan Traps, a very large volcanic province, was letting off tremendous amounts of smoke and debris into the air for the longest time. And so that was a second cause. But the most recent science has shown that neither of those events would have been sufficient to create the amazing mass wasting throughout the world of this great mass extinction, and with the wiping out of all the species. And therefore, this is a piece of evidence suggested that it was something like the inversion that I'm talking about, caused by a very close approach of Mars. We can research further into this whole subject, and in a very simple way, to investigate the stratigraphy on Mars, in particular of the Thracis region and the great volcanoes, to try to develop a sequence of dates there that would be able to be compared with similar dates from the stratigraphy on Earth, and therefore to see if there's a match. So there's some research that can be done about it. So here we have a theory that is fairly straightforward in some ways, but requires us to become familiar with several other theories in order fully to appreciate it and understand it. If you're interested in further investigation, there's more information on my website, cienciapress.com. Thank you very much for listening.